So I think I don't want to hog the limelight here, so I'm going to let our lovely panellists introduce themselves. My name is Calum McSwiggan. I am a writer, LGBT plus advocate, and content creator. So I'll hand it over to these lovely people.
Hi, my name is Abi. I'm a writer-producer, and I currently work at Pink News.
My name is Dom&Ink. I'm an illustrator and author. Wow, that is surround sound. And I illustrated and wrote Free to Be Me.
Hello, I am Jamie Windust. I'm a non-binary writer, model, and public speaker.
Hi, my name's Moyo. I just create spaces for people of faith and like LGBT people of colour.
Amazing. And we are here today to talk about representation. That is the topic for this evening. So for my lovely panellists, I'm really interested to hear what representation means to you. And feel free to take it personal. Feel free to talk about yourself and your own identity. So I'm going to throw it down the end here to start us off.
Okay.
No pressure.
Okay, that's like really interesting. Okay, so I think honestly, the first time I genuinely felt represented, I went to go see Janelle Monáe like last week in Manchester, and I literally just watching her gave me a panic attack because it made me realize that like, oh, I never really see like queer femme people being themselves, being free, loving themselves. And then it just made me really sad that I hadn't really seen that before, and then I panicked. And then the steward was like, why are you crying? And I'm like, leave me alone, I need to watch Dom&Ink. And yeah, but I think representation for me is about seeing myself as a whole person. Like a lot of I'm ace, I'm non-binary, I'm bi, I'm black. It's like I'm Christian. I have a lot of different identities going on. And so it's really nice sometimes to see yourself represented as one single thing and not just have to break up the parts of yourselves, because we don't think of ourselves as parts. We're whole people. So that's representation to me.
Oh, me.
How'd you follow that?
Oh, I'm still very stressed that my voice is coming out, but I'm not.
It does sound weird though, I know.
I think for me, representation, the kind of concept of representation has changed quite a lot in terms of its importance. Like, I think representation is very important, but a lot of people kind of see that as the one kind of thing that they can do that they've then ticked it off the list and they're done. So for me, representation is obviously super important. As a model, I am often kind of used as that representation. So I get to see a lot of the behind the scenes of why we're being cast and why we're being put in these situations. So it's not always great. But I think what we need to do is move forward from representation and see it as like step one, but then actually include representation behind the screen or behind the camera or behind the books that we're reading and the content that we nourish ourselves with. And also make sure that we continue that. So don't just use representation as like a blanket statement for, yeah, that's fine, we've put a queer person into this mixture. It needs to kind of be sustainable in that respect.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think non-binary identities are some of the most underrepresented identities out there. I think in your modelling agency, you're the only non-binary model. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they found some more. So the monopoly, my monopoly is gone. But they did set up like a wing in the agency of non-binary models. So yeah, it's also like really important that I'm often cast in things as a non-binary person, but there's so many more ways to look non-binary. Like I think people think because when these people put non-binary people in things that we always have to look very visibly queer, whereas actually that's not correct.
And Dominic.
It's what they said, both of that. I think for me, representation is obviously it's a massive thing because when you feel represented, you relate to something, and you see a bit of yourself in it. And I think when I first felt represented was when I saw Will and Grace, and it was Jack. So I was like, he's effeminate, he's on primetime TV, and he was like, oh my God, hi. But I will say though, in LGBTQ plus representation in general needs to get better. But out of the community, as a gay, white, cisgender man, I'm represented quite a bit. Like, we're like the privileged ones out of everyone. Like, there should be way more representation for non-binary, for those of colour, everything, I feel like we get it quite easy in terms of that. Do you know what I mean?
Do you think we hog the limelight a bit sometimes? Like, I think pride events and things can so often, you see a load of cis white gay guys and they tend to take over a lot of the time.
Yeah, they take over space. And I think it's, in terms of that, it's about, you know, if you are like a cis white gay guy, like if you go to something like UK Black Pride, it's to know that you're there to support and raise their voices. You're not there to take over and make it about you. So that's my little bit.
Just to add to that, everything you've all said. But I think it's important to see yourself reflected in what you're reading or what you're watching. Like, when I was like realising that I was a lesbian, I was like, well, black people aren't gay. So I was like, well, this isn't who I am. Like, I'm obviously just attention-seeking, kind of. So I think it's so important to see yourself everywhere, which I think I still haven't seen someone like me in a lot of things, so.
Do you think that's quite difficult to kind of, when we're talking about intersectional minorities, it must be incredibly difficult if you fit so many different identities to find somebody like you out there?
Yeah, I think it is really difficult. I think I can always find like someone who's black or someone who's gay, but anyone I find who's like black and queer is normally like American, and I think there's something really unique about being British. So I think it's definitely, if you are a minority, you have to like amplify your voice to get it out there so you can represent for everyone else.
Absolutely. And we are here, obviously, to talk about books. So I know that you mentioned Janelle Monáe, and you mentioned like Will and Grace, but do you guys have some examples in literature where you felt that you've seen yourself represented? And if you haven't, let's talk about that as well. So let's go this way this time.
Easy way. I can remember, I have two examples of when I like first saw myself in books. So one is White Teeth by Zadie Smith, which features someone called Irie, who's like West Indian and English, and I think I saw myself in it because it was written in a part of London that I grew up in, and it was the first time I really read like a black British character, and like it was incredibly flawed. And I just remember like it was like an English book in like year 12, so I must have been like 16 or 17, and I like literally went home after that class and read like the whole book like straight away. And I think at the time I was like, wow, okay, this is like great, but I think now looking back, like, that's the first time. And I like love books. I lived next to a library, and that's the first time I ever saw someone who like was like me. And then the second book was, which I actually saw over there, is TAMIE by Audre Lorde, which I started reading when I had a year abroad in America. So I took a few English classes, and that was one of the books. And I think it was just strange because I've never seen my experience reflected back at me before. And I think I cried when I read it, which was like strange. But yeah, so those are my two examples.
I think that's quite a common response, people having those kind of overwhelming emotional reactions when they see themselves represented for the first time. Do you think people who aren't necessarily within a minority really understand how difficult it can be to grow up without seeing yourself represented? And I think sometimes too that we may grow up not seeing ourselves represented and we don't even realise it until that moment when we see it for the first time.
Yeah, I think when I was like rereading all the stuff I used to write when I was like at primary school, like all of my characters are like white, like all of them are white. I never used to write black characters. I never used to like, when I used to like imagine scenes or like daydream, like I was always a white character. And I only now reflect on that as because I didn't see black people in the things I was reading or the things I was watching. So I think definitely, like I think you wouldn't understand that because it's the norm. So you wouldn't ever not notice that, I guess.
Is that something that you felt yourself, Moyo?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I agree with what you're saying about the black British experience, because I feel like black Americans are the most visible black people, and therefore like a lot of people see like black American culture as just being like everyone's black experience, but that's not what it's like. Like someone who was born in Britain has a very different experience of being black as someone who was born in Nigeria, or someone who's born in Nigeria and moved here, or someone who's born in America. And we don't all have the same experiences or the same way of thinking about our blackness. Like it's a very different experience to be a black person who doesn't have any connection to like the country that you came from. That's the black American experience. They don't have like that culture. Whereas like me as a black Nigerian, like I can go home to Nigeria. So that is a very different experience, I think. Yeah, sorry.
And is there an example of literature, for instance?
Yeah. Okay, so I recently, I don't know, like the book Freshwater by Emezi Imankwe. She's a Tamil Nigerian non-binary writer, and it was nominated for the Women's Prize which I have mixed feelings about, but that's another story. But it's an absolutely incredible book, and it's written around her. Basically, in Igbo ontology, there's this idea called like Yobanje, and it's like basically in Igbo culture they believe that everyone kind of reincarnates, but the Obanje like is a spirit that kind of stops the what was it? What's reincarnation? Yes, sorry, stops the reincarnation. So this book is about is spoken from the spirits inside of this person, from their perspective, and it's super queer, it's super non-binary, and it's super based in their culture, living in Nigeria, then moving to Africa, and then moving to America, and it's an absolutely incredible book, and I would just get, like, everyone just needs to read it, because it's so interesting to read a book where it's super queer, but then you also have, like, it's not just white queerness, it's a specific black queerness. And that's like really cool to read and see. So yeah.
Dominic.
Okay, so after these amazing statements, mine's like totally left field. So, girls laugh now. Well, I was on your radio show yesterday, and I'm a massive comic book geek, which I'm very proud of. So the first time I saw something I felt represented was when I was 19, which I know you're thinking, oh my God, he's 19 now. No, I'm 32. But thanks, everyone. And it was in a comic shop in Manchester I used to go in, and it was a Green Lantern comic, and it was like a one-off one where in an alternate universe he was gay, and on the cover it was two superheroes kissing, getting married, and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. I remember buying it, and I think because there was so much controversy at the time about it, they never really continued that kind of spin-off idea. But I remember seeing it, and it was just such a powerful moment. I was 19, and I was like, this is amazing, because so many people around the world will read that. Comics are such a big industry. But my other one I would say is out recently, and I love it, and it's by Alice Osman, and it's called Heartstopper, and it's a beauty. Do you love it? She loves it. Like, it's so good. It's so good. And it's an amazing graphic novel about two boys who fall in love at school, and it's so beautiful. And Volume 2's come out this week, and everyone should read it, because you can read it cover to cover like 4 times, and it's just beautifully done.
Jamie.
Plot twist. I'm so sorry. Mine's going to sound hilarious, but I don't know if I was dragged up as a child, but I didn't read a lot when I was young, so therefore the representation at that point was fairly slim. And also now I tend to consume not just books, but kind of any media content that I do consume. I'm a narcissist, so I'm like, I have to see myself in it in some way, otherwise I don't really care for it. That's why mine is the unauthorized biography of Princess Diana. So I really saw myself in her. That sounds really weird, but I really felt, even though like we're obviously, actually we're not polar opposites, we're the exact same. But I really felt kind of like a resonance with her. But I think, ironically, that kind of shows that there is a very large lack of non-binary kind of, not even fiction, but like non-fiction, and just kind of general chit-chat about that. There was one book there that's very recent, which is Diary of a Drag Queen by Tom Rasmussen, which was just like iconic, because it was that was kind of the first representation that I'd felt, and that's very, very recent. You know, that was like in November that came out. And probably also a reason why I'm writing my own book. But yeah, do you know what? On the grapevine, there's like loads of trans and non-binary books that I know are going to be coming out next year that are going to just swamp the scene, so it's going to be amazing.
I feel like a lot of people have used this like expression recently, but do you feel like we are at a kind of tipping point in terms of that kind of representation? Because I feel like in the past maybe 10, 15 years, there's been an awful lot of, you know, again, gay white men being represented in media and in literature and everywhere else. And I feel like maybe we are getting to that point now where we're starting to see a little bit more trans and non-binary representation. Obviously, it's got a long, long way to go, but people like yourself writing books and...
I don't really understand how I'm writing a book. It's really difficult. But I think I saw something really interesting yesterday that like The Guardian put out in 2014, that 2014 was the trans tipping point, or that was like the moment that trans representation was becoming more mainstream. And I think to look back on that, which is what, 5 years ago, it's really not moved that far from there. And it's obviously had its ups and downs, but I think the more nuanced the conversation gets and the more complex it becomes, people who don't know how to do representation well are kind of falling into these traps, and we're going backwards and we're going forwards, and then we're going, you know, 1,000 miles backwards again. So it's, what I think that shows is that we should all do it ourselves. I think when representation comes from the right people, that's when it's done best.
Do you think it's difficult to get people to care, especially when it's a story that they necessarily can't directly relate to? For instance, like getting a straight man to take an interest in a non-binary story. Do you think that's difficult? How do we... This isn't just a question for you, Jamie. This is a question for all of you.
I think in general, yeah, I mean, even stuff like, I know my friend's just got a boyfriend watching Queer Eye, and he's not in any way homophobic or anything like Love in Species, but she's like, he's only just watched the first episode, and I think it's because he didn't see anything he could relate to in Queer Eye, but he loves it because it's like just making over straight men, like the first season. So, but I do think it is in a way difficult maybe sometimes, unless they're like really into sort of like certain fiction or books or like genre, it can be a little bit harder to get someone to buy into that. Like the example you've used, if it is like a straight man reading a non-binary book, if that makes sense. But I actually think there's a thirst for that though as well. I think there's a massive market out there who want to read it. I know with Free to Be Me, I've had so many straight people message me saying they've bought it for themselves to educate themselves on LGBTQ+. So that's good to know that there's people out there buying it, as well as the LGBTQ+ community, which is amazing.
Also, I think it's really interesting that, like, for instance, straight white men can't see themselves in anything else that is a straight white man. Because, like, for most of, like, my existence, like, I don't know, if I played Pokemon, I was playing as a little white boy. Like, if you're, like, the further you are away from, like, this cis, white, straight, you're always going to have to see yourself through that. And I think like, cis people and white people need to, like, start thinking, and straight people need to start thinking about, wait, why can't I relate to this? What am I thinking is so different about these people that I can't relate to them? Because I can relate to straight people. I don't want to.
I guess it's like, I guess it's kind of like having that uncomfortable conversation with yourself and addressing what your own prejudices are that maybe you didn't realise you had. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But also, like, no one has an issue, like, relating to Disney characters or, like, random cartoons. Like, why can you see yourself in, like, I don't know, a tree story, but you can't see yourself in a non-binary story?
There does seem to be this issue where anyone is imagining themselves as a white person, and that's fine, but once it goes the other way, then suddenly that's an issue. Like, we've seen this with the backlash of the Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
I think as well, like Dom said, it makes people don't want to read something that's going to challenge them or make them feel uncomfortable. That's kind of like, in a way, I like making people feel uncomfortable by the things that I say about the non-binary lived experience, but also try and counteract that by being, like, hilarious and stunning. So, like, it's something relatable to most people. Yeah. But, like, and sometimes I will not dumb down my message, but, like, be funny with it so that it's approachable, because I think people, like you said, like, people don't want to have to get to a point where they have to talk about something that they know they're going to be outed as, not a bigot, but as just being ignorant or uneducated on. Work.
And do you think, we're going to get controversial now, do we think there's an issue in publishing itself with these kind of, you know, gatekeepers out there preventing LGBT plus people from, you know, getting their stories out there? Because there is this perceived idea that your average person isn't going to want to, you know, pick up a non-binary book off the shelf, when I think they do, and I hope that they do.
I bloody hope they do.
Who will? When's it out? Go on.
October.
There we go.
Next year. I think yes, no shade to Penguin, but like yes, because a lot of the people that I know don't, they kind of have like a mindset of like, they just don't think that they're going to be able to go straight up to the big boys and be able to do the work that they do and it be reciprocated or acknowledged in the same way that we do when we go to independent publishers. So like I'm with a LGBTQ plus specific publisher purely because I know that a lot of the barriers that I would face if I came to a mass market publisher wouldn't be the same. Like, there's just a level of understanding there that means that I don't have to spend the first 3 meetings like explaining myself and explaining my identity. I think that's relatable to like most people if your identity is not conventional in all forms of work. Like there's lots of ways in which as queer people we often kind of go straight to specific queer spaces to work, or we try and like find our spaces rather than going to the mass market spaces because we feel like we're gonna not be treated the best way. So it's frustrating, but I think they've taken a chance and it's worked with Dom. So.
Thanks, guys. I will say, like, in my personal experience of getting Free to Be Me published, because, I mean, I first pitched it to publishers 4 years ago, and I got an email that was saying that LGBT is not trendy, so it never saw the light of day for like a few more years. I was like, okay, Carol. So, then when I got, I sound like an arsehole, a literary agent, but when I showed her the pitch for Free to Be Me, she was like, this is the book like the world needs, and that was November 2018, and we went to tons of meetings with different publishers, like really big ones, like Penguin Rivals, a lot of them, and the Penguin meeting was by far the best one. Harriet was there, weren't you, Harriet? Give us a wave to Harriet, yes she was, and everyone turned up, literally. It's like normally when you've got a meeting, it's like you, maybe if you've got an agent, or like there's like 2 editors there, the whole Penguin team turned up. I had like editors, marketing press, everyone wore rainbows, they all bought rainbow cake, even though I can't eat lactose, but thank you. There was goodie bags, and the passion in the room was insane. Like, I nearly cried afterwards, and I have like zero emotion. But it was so, I walked out and I had goosebumps, and I was like, that was incredible. But compared to the other publishers we'd met, like one publisher was like, can you take the gay out? Another one was like, can you really write about coming out? Like, do you understand that? And I was like, yeah, because I came out. And I was like, have you ever come out? And she's like, well, no, I'm straight. And I was like, why have you got this job? So there was a lot of like really difficult, tricky conversations, but I will say from my experience with Penguin, they were absolutely brilliant. And they also really listened in terms of the book, in terms of what I wanted to do with representation, inclusivity in the book, because a lot of the characters are very different, and I wanted to represent everyone from the community as much as I could, and they were brilliant about it. Because I know when I had meetings with other publishers, they were coming in at a commercial angle, and they were like, this will only sell to this certain person, and it's got to be this kind of gay. It can only be so queer, it can't be like fully out there, whereas Free to Me is like unapologetically gay dinosaurs, gay sloths, gay everything. Like, so yeah, but I'll say I think Penguin did it really well.
You mentioned being told to like take the gay out, or you know, make it a bit more straight. Do you think there's an issue with where LGBT plus people and voices can't tell a story without it kind of being pigeonholed into like an LGBT plus category? Like if you wanted to write a cooking book, you never know.
I can't cook for shit,
would it then be branded as a gay cooking book because of your identity? Do you think that is an issue? Potentially,
I think, but then again, I feel that's another conversation where it's like, your identity as like an author or illustrator and you being queer then becomes a USP for something, for a product to sell. So then it's kind of like, there's a whole like grey area there where it's like a mishmash, and it's instead of it being like something really important, it becomes like maybe a trend or tokenism.
Yeah,
so no, go on.
Because I do think in the industry, like, say you were pitching to someone, they'd be like, oh, we've already had a black story this month, or oh, we've already got like a non-binary model this week, or whatever. Like, I think there's always like, publishers are like, oh, we've got one, so we can't have another one. Whereas I think with straight white men, there can be 100 stories about straight white men doing exactly the same thing. But even if your story is completely different to another black person's story, we've already had a black one, so no, sorry, not today, kind of thing.
I had a rejection once from a publisher who said, we've already done a gay book this year, can't possibly do another one.
Because all the gays will buy that one book all year round. It's like, honestly, it knows, it's like Pride season. It's like when they're like, for Pride Month, the approacher, and then Pride Month's over, and it's like, I don't stop being gay on July the 1st. I'm not like, you know what, I can't go near a penis for another year. It's not like I'm there at a time, like only 365 more days to go. Like, it really wants to be like it's all year round. That's frustrating they said that to you.
Moyo, you seemed very passionate about this topic when we brought it up. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Everyone's like said everything, but also I feel like publishers shouldn't forget the roles that they played like earlier in the 20th century in censoring LGBT books, and also like tropes like bury your gays, like those are from publishers, because they were like, you can't have thriving queer couples, one of them has to die. So I feel like
It's true.
It's horrible, but that's what it was like. And I feel like publishers need to take more responsibility for maybe I know that, you know, these are institutions and institutions are made of people and those people don't continue ever, but I think as an institution you have to take responsibility for your history and your past. I think publishers need to acknowledge they had a real role in that.
And do you think there's an issue with people being given the opportunity to tell their own stories? Like you might get a story about a gay person or a trans person, non-binary person, but it's not actually being written by a person that matches that identity. Do you think there's any issues with that within publishing?
Yeah. No, yeah, you're very much right. I think that what happens is it's like we're sold narratives about what it is meant to be gay or it meant to be trans and what it is to be non-binary. And then other people think that they can just pick and be like, oh, this person did this, and that's the identity. That's not how it is. We're all individual people. We all have individual experiences, and we should express that. And I definitely think you're right. There are I don't know what it's like, for instance, to be, I don't know, a straight person. I'm not going to write about straight person things. I'm not going to do that shit. So, yeah.
I think at the same time it's important that, you know, straight writers do include LGBT plus characters within their stories as well, but I think there's almost like a balance between the two things. It's like you shouldn't be stepping into a person's shoes.
They don't have to make the story about being LGBT, but they can put the character in. Like, you can give a character a girlfriend. You don't have to talk about their experiences. You don't have to do that.
Exactly. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I think as well, like, what jars me about that is that, you know, like you just said, like, as queer people, we will get shut down for not being allowed to do a book or whatever because they've done one already. But a straight writer is more than okay to go into a situation where they can write about a lived experience that they don't have, and their powers that be or publishers or whatever don't see a problem with that. And also, it's just so, I think what they don't realise is it's so glaringly obvious. Like, when we read that and we're like, oh yeah, that's really just not right. Like, it's just sour. It just doesn't resonate. What I would say is, if you do kind of allow queer people to tell their own stories in that respect, that you make sure that, this isn't like directed at Penguin, sorry everyone, but like, it's just in all our kind of conjoined experiences, it's so often that people feel like they're giving us the opportunity of a lifetime by giving us the opportunity to just do what everyone else has been able to do for years. So therefore they will either like not pay you or pay you tuppence for like no real reason. So I think it's about, if you do go into those scenarios as a queer person, that you know your worth and you don't kind of fall back on yourself and just be like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. This is an amazing opportunity. Get a literary agent, kind of almost exploit the system in a way, because like, truth be told, you know you're not going to be able to do it on your own, unfortunately, because our institutions are not built for us. So get a little army together and just get that cash.
I do also think, though, that I shouldn't have to always want to tell my story. Like, I should be able to make something up or, like, talk about something else. Like, I think there is a pressure when you are queer to, like, do, like, queer pain and, like, perform that pain. So there should be, like, an option. Like, there isn't, and I don't think there will be for a while, but there should be an option to just write about nice, happy stuff that's nothing to do with you.
Also, sorry to like interrupt, but what you said about queer pain is very interesting, because I feel like it doesn't benefit the person who is expressing that pain. Like they're going to experience all this trauma, and they're going to talk about it, and then a straight person's going to be like, oh my gosh, you're so strong, you've inspired me. But like, what about that person? What about their mental health and well-being? Are you looking after them? Are you checking up on them? And I don't think there's ever that. I don't think straight people think about the people that they like look up to and are inspired by. I don't think they think about them as being vulnerable or being sad or sometimes feeling isolated. And I feel like, I don't know, that was a bit random.
Yeah, it's like trauma porn.
Yeah.
Like, people just kind of love hearing you talk about the darkest moments of your life and then how you got to the brightest without really caring. They're just like, God, that's amazing.
Yeah, tell me about your coming out story. Who rejected you?
Yeah, or like people just be like, so how many times did you like want to not leave your bedroom? How many? And it's like, yeah, but you don't really care. You're just like getting a thrill off of knowing that your life has been a bit easier. Also, can I just retract the statement? I'm not just here for cash. Oh, I said get the cash. I don't mean just the cash.
Yeah, because you love me though, don't you?
Yeah, thank you.
And we kind of talk about, you know, the improvements that we would like to see in this world, but is there anything that we can do, you know, with our platforms, but, you know, everyone in this room, what is it that we can do to try and, you know, put the pressure on and make these changes happen?
I was gagging to say something, I was like, I think, like Jamie said, and they rightly pointed out, it's utilising the opportunities you've got on your platforms to project others' voices and your voices and everything like that. And I think as well, like, the lowest form of activism that anyone can do in this day and age is put a post on Instagram. Because if you share a picture of, like, a queer book or an illustration or artwork or your favourite non-binary model, like anything like that, if you share that message, you're sharing that to all your followers who may reshare that, and you're spreading a message to everyone then, because Instagram is like the biggest commercial place right now to get a message out. So I'd say it's also as well to keep supporting like queer literature, queer music artists, queer films, everything. Like go and buy a ticket, watch a queer film on your own, just so you've got some money in the bank for that production. Like, and also buy Free to Be Me and all the other books on the book club. But, but yeah, I think it's that it's utilising it's utilising the opportunities you've got and weighing up, right, is this going to be a good one for me, or is this going to actually damage me and are they going to speak over me? Or can I take this and use it in a way that's going to benefit a lot of people? So, yeah.
And where do we see the future of kind of representation within literature? Do we think we're going to hit that point very soon? Do we think we're going to achieve it? Or do you think we need to work harder, we need to push a little bit more to get all of our voices heard?
I think that it is going to change, and I don't think it will change for a positive reason. I think everyone knows there's money in queer stories. I think everyone's catching on to that, so I think publishers will want money, so they'll have to put money in stories, I think.
Money in queer.
Yeah.
All around, like, literally Pride is like Christmas.
Yeah.
Get that cash. Jeez.
Just the cash.
I think as queer people, we should definitely be more aware of pink capitalism, and we should be thinking about it more, and like how like it is really grim that like these companies don't care about us. They don't care. They're not it's not like they're hiring us. It's not like their CEOs are LGBT. They're not. They care about the fact that we now have money, that more of us are not homeless, that we have money to do stuff. That's really grim. And we should be like questioning that. And instead of just like being like, oh, it's so cute, there's so many rainbows, investigate. Why are they doing it? Are the people in the top also like donating to anti-LGBT charities? Like who's behind the scenes? I don't know. We should just like examine it more now that LGBT stuff is getting it more into the mainstream and into the forefront.
I think that's a really important point, and not to contradict what you just said, because I completely agree with you, but I do think there genuinely are some brands, organisations out there who do care, and I think we've seen some wonderful examples this Pride season of some amazing companies and things giving like 100% of their profits to LGBT plus charities. And yes, we could be cynical and say, you know, they're just doing that for PR or whatever, but I do think there are some genuine allies and genuine LGBT plus people behind the scenes. But I also think it's very transparent that there's a lot of companies and organisations out there doing it just because they want the money. And I think as consumers, we should be aware of that and aware who's doing what, and, you know, be a little bit more thoughtful about where we spend our money. I'm going to throw it over to the audience for some questions, but do you guys have anything else you would like to add before I do throw it over to these guys? Absolutely nothing. Okay, yes, Rowan is in the back with a roving microphone, so if anyone has a question, just stick your hand up and she will jog over to you. I'm hoping someone over here, so she has to run.
A hand.
We have a hand over here.
A shirt hand.
Oh, sorry, I do have something else to say.
Okay, put that microphone away.
I feel really bad. On this whole panel, we haven't talked about disability, the fact that, like, we don't have that many disabled LGBT representation, like physically disabled people, mentally disabled people. We need more of that. That'd be nice. We should think about that more, especially as a lot of our LGBT spaces aren't actually physically accessible. Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Right.
Don't apologise. It's a very important addition. Okay, Rowan, you're allowed.
So I was just going to say, fun fact, no central London LGBT venues are currently physically accessible, so everything's fine.
Iconic.
I was just going to ask, like, where do you think the line is drawn between, as you were saying before, like a non-binary book or like a trans book, like, at what point do we kind of put our identities aside and it's kind of like, I'm an author, not, you know, I'm not, like, I am, yes, might be a trans author, but I'm also someone that's writing a book. And, you know, there's no label on the front that says, like, a straight white man wrote this. So it's kind of, I don't know, in terms of, like, a selling point of view.
I think it's completely dependent on whoever is writing. Like, for example, like, for me, call me, like, a young twat, but, like, because I'm young and a bit boisterous and I have probably not learned a lot about the world yet. That's not true, but like I feel comfortable now putting that at the forefront of my identity purely for representation purposes and because I want to. However, I know a lot of kind of older, they won't mind me saying that, older trans people who have the view of like, I'm trans, yes, but like the work that I do is in no way affiliated with the fact that I am a trans person. And I think it's completely dependent on who you are. If you want that to be a signal of your work, then fine, because for me, for example, a lot of the work that I do has that running through it. But I would say that if anyone does that, be very aware of the emotional labor that comes with that, because then you're kind of constantly giving.
Yeah, because you then like lose control over whether you're seen as an author or like a non-binary author before you're seen as just an author.
Yeah, and it can put people off, but then that's kind of their problem, you know? It's not a me problem, it's a you problem. Not you, but...
Calm down.
Yeah.
I also think that because I'm black, like, everyone's going to know I'm a black writer whether I say it or not. So I think because my blackness and my queerness is so integral to, like, the content I make, I think I don't want to separate from it. And I think I am black and I am queer and I write because of like the experience I've had. So I think I wouldn't want to separate from it. Like, yeah, so.
I agree.
I spoke about this with Dom on my radio show yesterday, but I have come up with quite a few frustrations. I tried to write a travel memoir, and I just wanted it to be a travel memoir, and I didn't want to specifically brand it as a gay book. But then everyone I spoke to was like, well, you kiss boys in it, therefore it's a gay book. I'm like, I don't want it to be a gay book, but it kind of is. So now I'm kind of leaning into that. Whether that's the right thing to do, I don't know. But it's a difficult question, and I don't have an answer. Any other questions from our lovely, lovely audience?
Yes.
One over here.
Forgot I've got this on.
Hi. Yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion today. My question is, I guess, kind of going beyond your work, but you as public figures. These days, I don't know, there are many words for it, influencers, Insta celebrities, I don't know, creators. I don't really know what they all are, but there are a lot of people out there representing themselves beyond their work as well. And as a Korean transmasc queer person, there's like not very many of me. And I definitely didn't grow up with that representation. So I've thought a lot about becoming more public in maybe getting people something that they can look at and emphasize with. But there's a lot of things that you have to sacrifice when you become more of a public persona. What are the things that you need to tell yourself to become that public persona and to be able to maintain that and to, in some ways, make the sacrifices that you need to make?
Work. God.
It feels up to me, right? Okay. I was like, I'd probably say, for me, and again, gay, white, cisgender, but I'd say I always think, before I post anything or do work with a brand or work on book pitches or anything, I have to remind myself, who am I doing this for and how will this help someone? But I also remind myself, someone out there will relate to this. Like, I'll put, when Free to Be Me came out, I had so many messages the day after the launch of different parents, guardians, teens, everything about how they felt they related to this book, and that meant everything to me. So I think for me, I'd say in your case, like if you do want to show off more of yourself in your story, I guess it's knowing your limits and your boundaries of what you want to share, and also if you're comfortable with sharing certain things or answering certain questions, you might get off followers or things like that. So maybe you could start off and like set yourself a little rule list of what you will talk about and won't talk about. But I do think the more that queer people share their stories and share their experiences with each other and everyone on social media or in conversations or in the pub or on the bus, you're empowering each other as well, and you're empowering yourself. I think it's a really powerful thing to do. So I say go for it.
Yeah.
That's what I say, do it.
I could literally talk for 9 years on this because it's something that's literally going around my head at the moment. I guess the first one would be is to like not turn into a bitch, but like know that you do not owe anybody anything. And that's often very difficult for a lot of people to hear, like, because they think as soon as you start giving online or giving, that when they meet you, that you're going to just like give. And it's like, well, no, it's really up to us as to how much we give and when we give it. The decline or button on your request will become like your best friend. And I think it's about like not feeling bad for like not showing your whole life. You don't have to show your whole life. Like there's lots of things that we don't share on our social media. I'm trying not to laugh now because I'm thinking about the things that I don't share.
Yeah.
Ding dong. But it's just about also relating to the previous question, like you can also do things online, like when we do ads or when we do stuff. Like, for example, I've just posted a glorious new ad that has no relation to like activism. And I think I recently got called out for that as being like, why aren't you dying by the sword all the time? You know, kind of stuff like that. And it's like, well, I just want to kind of do fashion stuff as well. And I want to do cool content. And not everything you have to do has to be like...
Massive statement.
You know, protesting for your identity. You can also have fun with it. Don't lose that love that you have for your social platforms, because as soon as it kind of builds, you just want to fuck off, basically.
I think it's great that you want to do the whole Insta celebrity thing, as you put it. But also, I think you can be the representation you want to see in the world without, you know, you don't have to go on social media to be that representation. I think, you know, just walking down the street sometimes, seeing a visibly queer person or a gay couple or, you know, a teacher in school or whatever it is, I think we can be that representation in the world in so many different ways. So if you decide it isn't for you, for whatever reason, it doesn't mean you still can't put yourself out there and, you know, be that. But I think when I was growing up, you know, whenever I would see any gay person in any context, that gay person changed my life. So, you know, whatever your identity, whoever you are, you can, you know, you can make a change just by being yourself. You don't have to put yourself on Instagram, but I think you should. I do think you should.
Got the power, you can do it.
Dominic, would you mind telling the story about the...
Which one? There was a lot of stuff going on that radio show.
Not that one. Would you tell the story about your book and how somebody used it to come out? Because I think that's very beautiful and relevant to this conversation.
So recently I had a message on Instagram, and like I was saying, I get a lot of messages off readers and parents, and it was a mother of someone who's basically... Their daughter got the book and filled in the entire book, but then gave it to the parent to come out because they'd never really mentioned it, and they were just like, Mum, Dad, and they'd filled in all the exercises, done the colouring in, and gave it to the parents, and it helped open up a conversation that was like comfortable, safe, authentic, everything, and the parents like filled in the pages with them and everything, and it was so lovely to read. Like, it was really, like, I was a bit of a mess with that. I was like, like, it was amazing, and it was, you know, stuff like that is really powerful. And I was telling you as well, like, a week after the book came out, a woman messaged me whose son was trans male, and she said that he'd been really anxious recently about how trans people are being portrayed in the media, and she got him the book, and she was like, it just helped us open up a whole conversation about his anxiety and his mental health, and he's so much more better because he feels he's seen and represented in these pages. And she was like, he's like a different person, and I'm so happy for it. And just reading that was the nicest thing ever. I just wanted to print it off and frame it and then cry in front of it all day. But in a good way.
So lovely. We have time for a couple more, if anybody else has any questions that they would like to ask. We have one down here. Go on, Rowan, run.
Come on,
Not
Rowan.
got all day. Clock's ticking. There we go.
Hi. Thank you for doing your talk. It's like a lot. It's really good to hear about all of it. But I just wanted to ask, you were talking about how the community is kind of pigeonholed into only having limited opportunities. Like, there can only be one gay book, there can only be one black book from certain different publishing houses and things. And it's a little bit intimidating and scary to think about, like, you know, like, because I'm gay and I sometimes think about writing and things like that, but I always think, but what if another lesbian beats me to it? Like, you don't want to compete with your community, and I don't think it's fair that we should be expected to, or even that a straight person might jump in there and write the gay book of the year or something, and it doesn't seem very fair. So I just wanted to ask, like, what do you think as a community we can do to like try and help combat that and make it less of like a there can be only one, like it's not Highlander, like can we just have some, like, I don't know.
I think, yeah, as well, like, it's about analysing, like, the differences between the people within your own community. Like, for example, I constantly get compared to other non-binary people in the media, and it's like, yeah, but we do very different things. And we both have very different lived experiences. So I think it's about realising that although, yes, you might share the same identity and a similar lived experience, you actually have very different paths, like you've lived a very different life. In terms of like that competition, I think it would be about eradicating that and actually supporting each other and just being like, babe, you're doing an amazing book. I'm going to profile it and be like, read this book, but also read my book. And it's like, or self-publish. I know so many people who have just like self-published their own books. Yeah, it's not necessarily as glam, but I think when you have a passion for writing and you just want your words out there, you can self-publish fairly easily nowadays.
I think this, for me, I think there's space for everyone. And I think, again, literally what you've said, like just supporting people and lift them up. Because I did an event recently with Charlie Craggs, who's an amazing trans writer, and I mentioned her book in front of everyone there, and I was like, everyone go buy Charlie's book. And she's like, no, tonight's about you. And I was like, no, it's about both of us. Like, it's about lifting, like, everyone go and buy, yeah, buy my book, but buy hers too, and buy everyone else's gay book, like, do it. Because I think the more that it shows that that people are buying it, more publishers will look for more writers and illustrators and artists as well. But self-publishing is good. I self-published one of my first books, and I mean, it was shit, but it did help me get my first like ever book deal with an independent publisher. And I think, like you said earlier, a lot of small independent publishers really are out there searching for a lot of like queer talent. So don't let it put you off.
I think also with like minorities, there is this idea that there can only be one, and like you have to be the best, because that's like what you've been raised with. Like there's only one of every person. So I think one thing I was always told is that no one can ever tell your story the way you can tell your story. So no matter if someone writes the gay book of the year, it won't be your gay book of the year. So I think just don't see everyone else's competition, because obviously we're all stronger together. So working together, but then also making sure that you tell your story too, because it won't be the same. So, yeah.
I think there was one in the back over here. Go, go, go.
Go, Rowan, go. It's that challenge, Annika.
Hi. So I've recently come out as non-binary, and I went to a drag night to perform, and I got a lot of abuse that night from the queer community about being non-binary and how it's not a real thing, and et cetera, et cetera. How do you feel that we can like sort of combat this in the community, and like, do you think there is a problem or stuff like that?
I always say that if you don't think non-binary's agendas are real, you're racist. Because at the end of the day, the only place that had a gender binary was the global north. In the global south and indigenous communities, there were a whole array of different gender identities. Even like in Nigeria, like Yoruba, like the part from where my family's from, the actual language of Yoruba didn't have a doesn't have a gender. Like my name is naturally gender neutral because no name in Yoruba has a gender, because before colonization, before the British went to Nigeria, there wasn't really the idea of gender. Like gender was like roles, not in the way that British people see it. And I think that it's really, really, really important for other queer people to realise that when they say things like that, like they are damaging so many other people. Like they are literally perpetuating white supremacy, which is really hard to like. That must be it's really uncomfortable to say that to other people, though. It's really uncomfortable to have to. Being a non-binary is really hard because it's like you're just going to have to continue defending your identity. And I would just say, like, try and find people and friends that when this does happen to you, you can like go to them and you can feel affirmed with them, because that's really important. because it is really hard, because people will always tell you that you are not who you say you are, but you are. Existing as yourself is literally resisting the patriarchy. That your existence is, your whole existence is resistance, it's political, and that is really incredible, but it's also a really big burden. So I really hope you have like a community of people that you can like go to and feel like safe with. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, that was amazing.
I think as well it's about realizing that if you're in a situation where you are being essentially like invalidated and told that you don't exist, often our kind of natural instinct is to defend ourselves and our community, and often we should, because there's an incredibly rich history behind it. However, I think sometimes you don't need to fight so much if you don't want to, because I think our natural instinct is to be like, no, I'm here, look at all of this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, you can say that if you want, but that gets so draining, and you can't, like, we can't realistically live our lives being like, hold on, no, I exist and I'm here, purely because that's not a way to live. So I think it's about realizing that you don't necessarily always need to fight. Like you said, like, your existence is I guess not a contradiction to their statement. Well, no, yeah, a contradiction, because you literally are fully formed, stunningly fully formed in front of them. So like, I can see that glow from here.
Yeah, like the little dots.
Yeah, the little dots.
They're inspired by you, actually.
Oh.
Don't do this to me.
My lawyers will be in touch. Are they stars?
No, they're just little dots on a little bit. I'm sorry.
Apologising. Scream. But yeah, just like don't. It's really hard because we don't exist in a world where we are common, which is really frustrating, because we fall into pockets of like for example now, like we feel safe and we feel comfortable. Then as soon as you kind of like step outside, or if you do something that garners a reaction from people that aren't within your community, you actually fully realise the state that we're in and the white supremacy there and the just like absolute disgust that happens. So I think it's about realising that you solely are not like the one person that has to tackle that. Another you, another am I. Like, we can collectively do it. So I feel like we often think that like, I have to do this and I have to change the world myself. And it's like, well, no, it's only 24 hours in a day. Do you know what I mean?
I also think that as allies, if you see stuff like this, it's important to call it out, because it's exhausting to have to defend yourself every day. So if you see it, like I know it's like awkward to do, but when people are like racist to me or say like weird shit, you also don't want to, like, you don't want to have to, like, I don't want to ever come across as like an angry black woman. So it's so nice when my friends like step in and like shut it down. And I think if you have like friends around you, like maybe they might feel uncomfortable with like confrontation, but just say like, it would really mean a lot to me if you stood up for me in situations like this and you wouldn't have to do it yourself. So.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that happened to you in a queer space of all places. Not that it should happen anywhere, but I'm really shocked that would happen in a queer space, and I would expect a lot better of that space. So if you'd like to tell me afterwards
where
this happened.
Shade. Oh. Yeah, we can spill tea later. Yeah,
amazing.
Also, there is like a non-binary London group, and they like knit and like hang out and have coffee and shit. I've never been. I don't live in London, but it's cute. Maybe, yeah.
I will check it out.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay. Do you have a question?
Yes. Where are we going?
Go.
Hello.
Hi.
Speaking of like queer pain, do we have any do we have any recommendations of not that? Like any positive LGBT stories, whether that's books or television? I know like that's a very small part of a very small genre, apparently. But is there any like positive stories that people, if they're feeling a bit like we're always dying and everything?
Free to Be Me.
I was going to say.
By Dom&Ink.
To be fair, I've been colouring that in all afternoon, so yeah.
Wow.
Anything else?
I think there are some positive. I mean, stuff like, I think in young adult fiction, you get a lot of stuff like that, like Love, Simon, that's quite fulfilling. You know, that's like a really nice I don't know, it's hard to find like a queer version of the Gilmore Girls, because Gilmore Girls is like, do you know what I mean? They're like, you watch it and it's like, there's not really anything going on, but it's just so happy. And it's just like, oh no, we're having a garden party, what do we do? It's that kind of vibe, innit? Like, I would actually love that, I would live for that. But I think, I'd probably say like there is a lot of young adult stuff out there that has that kind of space created. But I do understand what you're saying as well about queer pain and all that. But I think it's because a lot of people want to hear people's coming out stories or transition stories, and with that there's always going to be like maybe pain or sadness or I don't know, but I think people like to read a journey, and publishers like people to write about the journey so people read it and make money. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Makes sense, yeah.
Kind of.
No, it makes perfect sense, don't worry.
And I think that is all we have time for. So if you could join me in a huge round of applause for our fantastic panellists.